Okay, so I think that is the official launch of the session then, really. So here we are again, should I say, with the Freinet team. We're going to have a bit of a discussion. Well, I think we should just kick off, really, shouldn't we? Franz, what do you think? Is there, we got a list of, you said that there's some questions and some things. I think that the plan is that it's an open discussion, and to just be reflecting on the two different models, the two different methods, the similarities and bits and pieces like that, was where the conversation started at. And so, where do we go from here, Franz?
Well, I was just thinking, maybe we first ask how many of the participants know something about the education of Célestin Freinet. So maybe Sven and I should just say a few words about it, just for the kickoff.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea, because I'm not sure if everybody would have come to your talk that happened on the first day. So let's just to catch people up, let's do that.
Okay, Sven, would you like to say so, or should I go ahead?
You can start.
Okay, so you
I add things that come to my mind.
Right, good. So on Thursday, we had Hartmut with us, and he held a speech on the history and the outcomings and the ideas of Freinet education. Célestin Freinet is a Frenchman who was born in the 19th, no, was it 19th century? No.
Yeah, 19th century.
Yeah, and he started developing his pedagogy in the 1920s, and started an own school. And his ideas were basically, and in the whole width, if you look at them, very similar to what Alexander Neill developed in Scotland, and then carried on in Hellerau and later in Summerhill. The big difference between both educational theories, if you can call them, but they were more practical ideas, not so much theories. Because the interesting thing is they both wrote books about it, but they never wrote books about the theory of their education. It was more like they described what they thought was right. And the big difference between both is basically that Alexander Neill started schools and tried and experimented with the education in a school. And Célestin Freinet, from the beginning, always wanted to have his education for state schools and all the other schools, and not specifically his own school. And well, Neill didn't say no other, but there wasn't any other. And Freinet always tried to adapt it to the system of the state schools, and tried to put it into the system so that every teacher could use it in his own way, in his own surroundings, in his own settings.
Let me just add one point. You could, for Freinet, it was very important. He saw the state school as an achievement, because before, school was something for the privileged class. So for him, it was an educational project for social
publicization, making it public to everybody.
Exactly, that's the point. And so it was a point of equality for him to achieve a school for everybody.
In 2 points, they were very similar. The first is they were both socialists and they were both anarchists. So if you really look at the time in which they developed their education, they were way ahead of their time. And if you see that, what's amazing is that they both developed their education basically in the same years and the same century. And Célestin Freinet School will celebrate in 2033 to 35, because it's not quite clear which year exactly it is. But there's going to be big celebrations, but it's a few years later than Summerhill now. But still, they developed at the same time. And still, we suppose, and I talked to Henry about it, we suppose they never met, which is interesting, because especially Neill came around a lot and met a lot of people and met a lot of psychologists, psychiatrists, philosophers, and all the others, and always discussed his education with these people. And we don't really know if Freinet was more of a teacher on the spot in his school, or if he did the same as Neill. There's not so much public. There wasn't so much publicized about that. So today,
to add much in that conversation, because I think Michael was here at the time of the conversation. He said he thought there might have been an event or something where both of them probably were presenting.
Right.
Within the sort of new ideals in education, that movement, and that there was quite a few thinkers at that time that were sort of talking quite a bit, but whether, obviously there's no necessary evidence. And this is always something quite exciting, I think, about the whole history. This is obviously, again, so lovely about this conversation as well, is that the fact that these thinkers came around at the same sort of time.
Yeah, it's amazing, especially as you see that Neill was in Hellerau in Dresden in Germany at a time where what we call the Reformpädagogik came up with a lot of different ideas and a lot of different concepts, like the Jena Plan and even the Waldorf-Pädagogik of Rudolf Steiner came up at that time. And a lot happened in Germany, and then unluckily was destroyed by the Third Reich. But in this time, a lot developed, and still we here in Germany haven't completely come back to this tradition of having these roots and having these possibilities. So what we want to do as a Freinet movement is remind of these ideas and remind teachers that within their system, which is some parts of Germany quite strict, in other parts rather free, but within their system they have a lot of freedom to develop themselves and develop their education if they grab this freedom. And that's the point. Yeah. If you go to Summerhill, the concept is clear. If you go to a Freinet school, if you go to a Freinet school in France or in Belgium or in Germany, they might be completely different. And they call themselves Freinet schools. So what we think and what our basic idea is that Freinet education is a matter of attitude more than a concept. And that's what makes it possible for every teacher to adapt to it and kind of get to know the ideas and find the ideas and go into the concept and try to teach. And now this weekend it was quite interesting. Sven and I, yeah?
No, carry on. Go on, Franz. Carry on.
This weekend, Sven and I were at a meeting of very devoted Freinet teachers, and we really spent hours and hours discussing, and very constructive discussions and very interesting discussions. So late in the evening, we kind of fell into our beds and had to sleep a lot to get back on our feet the next morning again, which was a lot of fun and made it very interesting. And brought up a lot of new energy and the will to develop the education and keep it going. Even though at the moment, if I speak to teachers, I had a few colleagues to talk to about this, about the Summer Congress, and surprisingly enough, nobody knew Summerhill anymore. Yeah. And even if I talk about Freinet, not many people know what Freinet is. So I think it's a matter of our time, and that's why we wanted to have this discussion and this moment here with you in the Congress. We would like to talk about what we need to do. That's one of the major points, what we need to do to bring us back in the memories of the teachers all over the world, and tell them what great ideas we are trying to transport.
Absolutely. I think the first thing that I find so exciting about this is that we're talking about very, very similar values being implemented in two very different ways, coming from a very similar time, and that are still in practice today. And I think that it was interesting what you were saying, Derry, when Hartmut was doing his talk on Thursday, because you were saying that, you know, you hadn't heard of Freinet as well, and you've been on the circuit for many years, and you've been implementing similar kind of ideas that you were sort of going, wait a minute, that's what I was doing, that's what I was doing, that's what I was doing, all the way through. And yet you would have been doing that in the 70s, and Freinet would have started 20 years or 30, 40 years before that. But it's interesting how that happens. To me, that part of it, and exactly as you just said there, Franz, you know, people have heard of Summerhill, but people haven't heard of Summerhill. Many people, exactly as you say, have no idea what Summerhill is. And I could fly to Japan and have people asking me questions about it and very excited about it all the time. But then I go to my local town and they go, isn't that a supermarket? And I say, no, it's a school. Haven't you heard of it? You know, so I think that it's a very interesting, especially that I think is a very interesting topic. I think the first thing that I think is so powerful about both of them is they give a very huge sense of stability to the certain practice. And I do think that they're in quite different categories, and I like the fact that they're in different categories, and that or maybe not different categories, but play very different roles. And I think that's very important as well. But the most important thing for me is that they're 100 or so years old and are still going today. And that's something I find very interesting.
Henry, for this, that they think that's a supermarket. Of course, it's a pity, but there's a German school which is quite famous in the progressive education bubble. It's called the Bielefeld Laboratory School, and I once met the head of the school.
I visited.
Yeah, you saw it. Okay, so I was talking with the head of the school, and he said, okay, it's like a giant, but only if you are far. So maybe from England or from somewhere else, from northern Germany, we see it as a huge, important school. And they say, but in their surrounding, in Bielefeld and the city itself, it's quite unknown. They don't know about the importance of the innovation which is being made there. So we don't need to get depressed by this. No.
Yeah, but
yes, I agree.
Exactly. When I visited the Laborschule, it was full of kids from the university families, even though it was supposed to represent the local community.
Yeah, they have a problem doing that to have a representation. They said that, and that's a problem that lots of progressive and alternative schools have. I mean, in Germany, but also in other parts of the world. You could say, or we have to question ourselves, okay, what kind of elite club are we, or how can we not be that? I'm sorry, because I had a bad connection, so I couldn't hear everything what Franz just said about Freinet.
You know what I said, Sven.
I know more or less what you think, but I don't know what you said presented now.
I think this question of inclusion is really important, though. And we did have a workshop on it a few days ago, and it needs a lot of thought, I think. How do we get everybody into the democratic schools?
I would just, what is for me, if we talk on Neill and Freinet together, for me, it's one important thing. When I was looking on the webpage of your festival, and I checked it with the speakers, I found lots of speakers who wrote down there, okay, for me, very self-directed learning is a very important thing. And of course, for Neill as well as for Freinet is talking about the méthode naturelle, the natural method. By what he means, okay, kids or human are interested in things and driven by their interest, they are learning, and it's a natural thing. That's why he says natural method is to follow this natural drive. I'm interested in the world. I want to know how things are. And we can see, if we think, how is our present time and what is our situation in this? And I think the situation of Freinet and Neill is about the same, or we can offer a similar thing. So if we think about present times, I would say we can see that this idea of interest-driven learning or self-directed learning is spreading. It's spreading also in state schools. It's spreading also in schools which wouldn't say they're progressive schools or something. And on the one hand, I would say, okay, it's cool. It means that our movements and also other movements like Steiner or Montessori and others, they had an impact in the last 100 years. And we do have a less authoritarian education than we had 100 years before. And that's something that was really important to Freinet and which was really important to Alexander Neill. But what concerns me is that these programs are not just supported by the leftish, greenish alternative bubble, but are also interesting for the neoliberal thinkers. And I think that they are also they are getting stronger because they kind of fit to a neoliberal paradigm which has spread. We know it in the last 30 years very strongly, and I think it fits well because autonomy is an important thing. Individualism is an important plot in the nowadays discourses in the world, and I think this is why also for the state systems, also for neoliberal state systems, self-directed learning is something interesting. And okay, this is when I came to this point, I was thinking, okay, what makes the difference between me and them, between us and them, between Freinet and people who say, okay, we need autonomous manager selves who know how to reflect on themselves, how to direct their learning, which is so that they have a benefit on it. And what makes the difference between what Neill and what Freinet do and think, and how they think about learning, and between these neoliberal thinkers of individualistic learning, is that we can offer, and this is an impact that we hopefully can give in the last 100 years, but which has not arrived yet in the mainstream, that we add to this self-directed learning the ideas of democratic community in school, and that we have the learning and the idea of what's the English word, performance in school, which you could say things have arrived, which started 100 years ago, but the ideas of how a community should be organized and should organize itself, that's the ideas that we still promote that have not arrived in the mainstream yet. And this is something for what we stand in these times, in our times, in this late postmodern whatever, what we can and really importantly should offer in a world in which things fall apart, in a world where the United Nations are not being able to manage to hold nations together.
I would even postulate
from the field of pedagogy, that's what we can offer and what we should promote.
I would even postulate that these ideas of meetings in schools and stuff like that will never arrive in the neoliberal ideas and heads anyway. So hopefully that's the major point where we really differ, and that's good. What do you say, Henry?
I mean, I think there's lots of different topics I think that come around with this. I think that it's very often we're talking about the classroom, we're talking about the learning perspective, and when people are talking about schools, they're talking about learning, they're talking about the classrooms. You've then got the relationships that are happening within the classrooms. You've then got the how things, the curriculum that's actually being taught. Is it going to be a bit more self-directed or not? Is it what's the relationship between the teacher and the adult? What's the role of the adult? What's the role of the child within the classroom environment? And this is one area which I think, obviously these conversations very often and hence to a certain extent why I wanted a childhood festival rather than an education festival, because people talk about education and all of these bits and pieces, but I think that there's much more of a broader picture, so reflecting back on the school. The other area is the social and emotional development. What are we actually focusing on schools? Are we talking about academic, or are we talking about the social and emotional development element of things? Or are we including the two? Are we blending them all together? Where is the focus? Because now when we look at education, you focus on learning. That's what they do. You're gonna learn something. How are you gonna learn something is the next question. But what's happening is the education of the whole child, the fulfilled childhood, the time that children need to be doing the other things that they're not doing or outside of the classroom, sort of thing. And to me, that's an important area that also needs to be touched on. At the moment, whether I think what should be focused on, I'm not too sure quite. The other area is exactly what Sven was talking about, is you're talking about community. You're talking about the relationships that are happening within the whole school environment and what's actually going on as a school environment. And to me, those three topics are actually, they're all very key. I feel that at the moment, a lot of the time when people are talking about education, they're talking about what's happening more in the classroom. I understand that the world is full of classrooms, and so that's maybe where the focus is. My personal feeling, and I think especially from all of the experience we see at Summerhill, would be that schools should be probably focusing 70% on social emotional development, or 30 or 50-50 even, and this sort of bits and pieces. But the element of community, I think, is a really powerful one. And I think I agree that whether I think that is the best thing for us to focus on now, but I do think it's the priority now. whether the world is ready, the priority. It should be the priority now, because what that does is it gives community deals with relationships to each other, and it deals with relationships to the broader us, the society, and bits and pieces. And when we're talking about global, all of the changes that are, the threats that are coming to the world from the eco, all of these sort of problems that are coming, the sustainability of the world, it should be more to do with the community aspect. To me, is arguably what I would say is the most. I'm not thinking on a political level, I'm just thinking what the world needs.
Yeah, but it's political.
Of course, okay, yeah, sure, I'm sure it is. Yeah,
I mean, it's not just environment, but it's also like the global village. It's also the global community.
Yeah, but exactly. But what? I won't talk necessarily of the how to put specific sort of value to community within schools. I think there's loads of work that can be done there. But I do think that when you talk about focuses, but what is quite interesting, and I'm just going to bring this one to the table, is that all three of those things that I've just spoken about fundamentally come down to relationships. It's our relationships to community. It's our relationships to our each other, learning relationships, having time to play, and children hanging out with children, and that sort of thing. There's relationships to children, and then in the classroom, you're talking about the relationship between the teacher and the child, and the learning environment. Really, that's what makes the learning a better situation. If you have an honest, sincere relationship with the child, fundamentally, that's it. You can look at democratic practices, and you can look at things like that. And there's of course, there's bits and pieces like that. But in the simple form, all of us share the fact that we have much better relationships in the learning environment. And they're normally mutually respectful. They're normally, maybe the teacher might have, will be supporting the learner, will be helping out the learner where needed. But the learner will also be self-directing a little bit, and will have the choice and bits and pieces. But that relationship that the adult has with the child, and that children have with children, and that adults have with adults, the relationships are actually, and to me, it's really important when you think about community, because that then comes to sort of the global, our relationship with the world around us. And so when talking about all of these different elements that I've just mentioned there, the word relationship to me seems to fall back as being arguably one of the most important things. Now, I don't know, that doesn't quite answer your question of what should we focus on today, but whatever I think should happen, I think that there should be a sense of unity. I think that there's a real problem at the moment that there's lots of different places where people are sort of saying, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and what about this and what about that and what about this, and bringing their own methods of doing it, which I think is beautiful, by the way. I'm not saying that we should all do the same thing, but when we're uniting with each other, we should be talking about something that we all share. Because the problem is and making sure that whatever it is that we all share, we all unite around and say, this is what we're all focusing on, because that's what gets the extra weight behind it. But if we sort of say we want this practice, or we want this, or we want to implement this specific one, then someone goes, yeah, but I think that over that, and it starts to make things unstable.
Sorry, how was the development in the last 100 years then? Because these ideas are not new. They were basically developed by Freinet and Neill in their time, and they are very fundamental for this education. Now, what happened in the last 100 years? Why wasn't it possible to really spread it in the width that we were dreaming of?
Well, I think it was hard work. I mean, it's a strange way of saying it, but I think, Neill had his focus and managed to do what he was doing, and Freinet had his focus and managed to do what he was doing. They weren't the only two. I mean, there was many other people around that same time who, Janusz Korczak obviously is another right. Strong thinker of that time, and there's many others actually around that same sort of time. I think the most interesting thing is that we're now at a point that is very clear globally that there has to be educational change, and it's only the governmental people who like the control, who are getting the control bit out of it, who are not actually getting that. They don't really care about all of the other things that we're all talking about, because in the end they're doing it for the control reason. But that's maybe another conversation. But yeah, I think that there's much these sort of things, exactly as you said, as Sven said, self-directed education is coming into classrooms much more. Much better relationships are starting to be formed, and starting to realize, teachers are realizing they want to have better relationships with their kids. They want to treat the kids well. Humanity wants to have relationships. That's what we want to do. We want to have lovely relationships. We want to share love, and we want to do all the lovely things in the world.
And you need really, that if the individual has to take over responsibility. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
You too. If we're concerning relationships, Derry is raising hand. And as we have now half an hour talked, just the three of us, I would invite also the others participating.
Yes, of course.
Raise your hands. Add something important that we have forgotten.
Yeah.
Just raise your hand and we'll see it. Derry. Think of your microphone, Derry.
You're muted, Derry.
All right, you missed all the Irish swear words. It happens to me every time.
Now we have him unmuted,
he's frozen.
Disconnected.
He shouldn't have said the swear word. Now he's frozen.
No, maybe his computer's with an Irish swear word sensitive, so as soon as he swears at the computer,
and he shuts down.
Cuts off. Anyone else got anything to say? Oh, well, actually, we've got Liz has said financial there. What's the question now? Only if there's a consensus. Can you agree what the focus should be? Yeah, I'm hoping that the pandemic has shifted some people's thinking about the purpose of education, Henry. Exactly. In the world.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. Yeah.
Known for years that relationships are everything. However, the political powers seem to trump everything. It's an interesting one. That Liz, I don't know if you want to obviously join the conversations as well, please. Put cameras on and unmute microphones so we can have conversations as well. Marco, do you want to?
Marco's pointing up.
I'm just having a late dinner, yeah, I was thinking about I was watching the Most Likely to Succeed movie last night, And there was one point that really struck me, was the moment when the teacher was trying to make a change in the classroom, and the students were opposing because the purpose of the elementary school for them was to get high enough marks so that they can get to the college they wish. And the actual learning happens only in the college. Mm. So how can we change this mindset?
Marco, I would add, perhaps actual learning happens in the college, because that too can just be an extension of what was experienced previously, only you're paying to be coerced and compliant and everything else. I currently teach teachers. So I was a high school teacher for many years, a responsible subversive, I hope I am. And now I teach teachers. So the first thing I do is spend the first third or quarter of any course getting to know them. And then we co-create a syllabus, etc. And there's all kinds of opportunities for self-directed learning. But on the first day, after I did my little spiel and said, okay, that's it, I'm not going to be a talking head anymore. Here's some stickies. Give me your anonymous feedback. You know, what can I do to blah, 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 blah. One student said, I need you to make me learn.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
You know, when I
there's a Derry wanted to.
Yeah.
Derry's
okay.
back.
Derry's back. Fine.
Go on, Derry. Unmute, Derry.
But don't shut down now.
Shut off.
No Irish swear words.
You just missed it. No, look, I'm really sorry. The battery went flat on my computer. I was just going to say that in my experience, you develop community through practicing democracy and human rights. It's also learning, of course, but not subject content and coverage. And one of the tragedies now in England is, having moved a bit towards self-directed learning and respect for democracy and rights, we're now going back to subject learning to catch up with what's supposed to have been missed during COVID. And for kids who've forgotten how to behave and be obedient, they're going to be sent to special behaviour hubs. It's a bit awful right now. But we have had in the UK and in the Council of Europe programmes the idea that you learn about democracy and human rights by doing it and not just listening to teachers talk about it or passing tests. And you can do this in any classroom. I mean, my joke is always that learning about democracy and human rights when I was at school was like reading holiday brochures in prison. Yeah, but I'll stop there. But I think it can be done in any classroom, in any context, though unfortunately very few teachers learn how to do it when they're training to be teachers, and we need to get at teacher education to change this. I'm sure Liz Campbell would agree with that.
Sven,
I would like to add to what Liz said and what Henry also said, because in the pandemic it was very interesting in my school that I saw that there were a few pupils who had a very dissocial behavior before the pandemic, when they had to stay at school at home for several weeks, several months. These were the pupils who were most happy to be able to come back to school. So I talked of them as being the pandemic winners. And here in Germany, a lot of people were always talking about the children being the pandemic losers. But I always reminded them that there are also pandemic winners. And those were especially those kids who didn't value the communities as much and were very self-centered. And they came back and they had a change in their shift in their behavior. And the other thing is, what I experienced very often, and I talked to colleagues about that very often, is whenever I went to teachers' training, you heard a lot of speeches. You had a seminar, you had a PowerPoint productions and whatever. And there was a discussion in his speech. But whenever the end of this teachers training came up, the most interesting thing the people said was that what they enjoyed most were the breaks in between talks, when the community came together.
Yeah.
And it's not so much what the teachers were saying, but what happened in between in the community communication. And that's exactly what Henry also said. If you focus on the relationship and on the community, and then learning much more takes place in the gaps than in the moments where learning or teaching is focused.
Gabriel, do you want to join us?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for being late. I just came in, but to the question, like, why are we still not like moving more? Why does the whole movement after 100 years have not reached more, which is, I think, very sad. And I think I compare it to the known political dynamics that the right-wing parties or the fascist parties, they build on this simple unity, and the left-wing parties often get like diverse in their different opinions, which are very valid. So I think this is maybe also applicable to our movement, that there are many different branches, because different intelligent people develop their own intelligent ideas, but which is great, and I think we all have this organic image of diversity and not centralized movement. But at the other side, when it comes like to public, I don't know, lobbying or we lose power, and we see that we have our little projects which are wonderful, which are like light spots in this dark world, but we don't get like on a higher level. And I think a key there would be to really unify your efforts and get like, I mean, look at IDEC. It's not an organization, and we met yesterday and we spent like more than an hour like discussing, like not very relevant things. And this is maybe symbolic why we didn't like get further in the last 100 years. And maybe we need, I don't know, more common structure to unify our common efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. That's very interesting.
I would maybe just, we have now 20 more minutes, so I would pick this up and add one more thing, and maybe we can talk about the question, what is to be done? So another point that concerns me, I was last year writing with two other researchers a paper on what do we know from research on progressive education in Germany. And I read a book by Mills and McCluskey. I think they are from Australia, and they had this international perspective on progressive education, something like that. And it's a really interesting book because they asked lots of other researchers from different countries to describe the situation of progressive education in their country. And in the summary, they write, okay, what's the function that has alternative education? And I would say that Neill and Freinet, we can put them there. What's the function of alternative education in the school systems? And they say, okay, it's basically two functions. One is the innovation factor. Alternative education does give impulses and innovations in the system, and we can say that if we talk about self-directed learning. But they also give a moment of compensation of the system, because as long as there is an alternative school system at the side of the main school system, you can always send your kids to the alternative school system, and then the mainstream system can stay as bad as it is. So also what Gabriel said is an important plot, and this makes me think, okay, in this situation, what should we do? How can we develop? How can we make an impact? In which direction should we make an impact?
Seth, you want to join us, please?
Hello, everybody. The things I wanted to say. I sense your frustration, Gabriel, at the time spent at the meeting. But in a way, I think it's actually important because this is the community working out their relationships. And that goes to my second point, that doing that takes time. And I think it's one of the things that stops mainstream schools from doing this, because you have to allow time for this to happen. Yeah. You have to take some of that so-called curriculum time and allow the relationships to really develop, to argue, to find ways to build those relationships. And the second thing, I think we don't take enough account of the fact of the subtle use of power between adults and children. And many, many adults cannot give up that power. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get the mainstream doing what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, Seth. I was just sort of agreeing with all of that, and also adding to Gabrielle. I saw you sort of said about the festival. You know, I think potentially the in-person festival in 2022 can be a nice little thing for, because it's been going over. Quite a few people have been sort of thinking about, so what can we launch in this festival? What can happen as being part of this festival? And I think something that I've found very interesting is that that we have got people from all, weird way of saying it, walks of life revolved around childhood, and actually community as well. And I think that it's a really important thing, because a lot of the thing, when you're improving relationships, you know, we all know, if we just don't talk about education for a second, we all know that our, if you will, relationships within local communities has all been getting smaller. It's been getting globally, communities have been getting smaller, if not becoming nothing, maybe becoming online, but the physical relationships that are happening in the local areas, and things like that. I think that there's a lot to be said almost for people starting to having the option of experiencing the benefits of those wonderful relationships, and that then also sort of affecting or connecting to schools and the way that education in the local areas and the way that relationships work in those areas. And I think that things like that is also an interesting angle to it as well. Olivia.
Hello, everyone. I think besides the relationship piece, there has to be an appreciation of the people involved in the community piece as well. I mean, appreciating their strengths, appreciating what they can do, how they can do it. But just, and that's all part of the relationship. But I think it's important, you know, like back when I had Pinewood School, he couldn't read. He was the oldest kid in the school. He was 12. He couldn't read, but he was wonderful at fixing things. So everybody always went to him when they needed something fixed, and appreciating that he was able to see how to put things together and take them apart and fix them was, you know, important for him in his valuation of himself, because in school previously, he had just been a failure, but here he was, you know, honored for what he could do. So I think that piece of appreciating each of the people, students, teachers, everyone, for what they have to offer the community is a very important piece. And sometimes it happens in public situations. Of course, it's the unusual public situations, but I think it's important for us to keep that in mind as well. So.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you. Marco?
I was trying to think about the question already. How can we change the situation? And I'm kind of referring to Nana's workshop about the emotional hardships or emotional problems people have and how they affect our behavior. I think school is a kind of emotional pattern, and changing emotional behavior or behavior which is based on patterned behavior is really, really difficult, because it requires the person to actually face the trauma that's caused this kind of behavior. So in order to change the current education system, the people inside the system would need to face all of the horror that they faced in the school when they were kids. And that's not going to be happening easily. So the other alternative that I'm thinking about is the kind of disruptive technologies. That if we can somehow produce or invent something that will show people that learning outside school or instead of school would be so much more efficient and more meaningful than inside school, that could possibly make a difference. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Marco.
I was just going to say, we've got 10 minutes. Well, we've got about 5 minutes or 6, 7, 8 minutes left, sort of thing.
Didn't you say we have another half hour, Henry? No, I'm just joking.
No, there's another session straight afterwards. So unfortunately, we can't go on. I mean,
I was just thinking, Marco, what I was talking to my colleagues at my school, because I'm always trying to be changing the system. I'm working in a state school, and it's not a Freinet school. And I was talking to my colleagues and was saying things like, what we really need to do is have a compulsory law to say that at least every 3 weeks, we with our class have to leave the school grounds, go out into the city, go out into the countryside, and just be outside the classrooms, at least for a day. And that's something that is so valuable. You really notice that when the kids go out into society, into the world, and outside their own settings, outside their own school, which they know so well, which give security, and they come into an insecure surroundings, then they really make a jump. They really develop very well. And it should be compulsory for us as teachers to say at least every 3 weeks go outside or something like that. Or even things like where German authorities would really cry out if they would hear that, like have a truckload of wood and a truckload of nails and a truckload of tools on the school grounds, and let children play. And things like that would just change a lot. So that's why I keep trying to say we have to bring up more subversive ideas and bring up more really feelings of being a child, being not a fixed grown up in his surroundings, and thinking as a child we would completely act differently than being in a classroom, sitting around and listening to grown-ups. We need more of that. Jerry.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, no, Jerry put up his hand.
Another Jerry thing.
Whatever.
Anyway, so this is similar session to the one that we had earlier today. It was very interesting about what do we do now that the education revolution is happening. but it was one item I had down in my list of things for us to talk about we never got to, and I think it's really, really important. And that is, why does the system work so hard to maintain itself in its current shape that makes it so hard for us to do this? There's something, I think we really need to study that, because if we can't figure that out, it's going to just keep on doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
We still had some ideas which we about things that we could discuss, but I think we have to postpone that to next year in Leicester, Henry.
But what I'm wondering, is that the thing is that, you know, what's been going through my head is that whether it's worth spreading the word about having whether it's a monthly, or whether it's, you know, an opportunity where we can sort of get together to be discussing it a bit more and sort of and inviting people in that we think might bring something to the table that's a bit different and things like that. You know, I again, always with all of the idea of this for me was really I wanted to focus on the childhood, so that because from the homeschooling, from all of the different areas, from so many different places, we can get such wonderful input on this same topic that brings so much different things to the table, I think, which is
that would be nice.
And I'm just sort of wondering whether that's very possible, whether people would be interested in something like that. Obviously, we could sort of try and set something up and have a few and sort of, you know, sort of spread the word, that each person spreads the word a little bit. I don't know whether that will work if we have 100 people in a Zoom meeting online, or whether we're all just going to sit there and go, okay, this is just not working. But it's an interesting sort of, I don't know whether people think that something like that leading up to the festival next year, we can have a bit of a working party of people together, maybe to sort of start to pre-think about it, so rather than just having a new conversation then, you know, to start to get a few things together, so that when we come together, you know, people are talking about, for example, those thoughts about like a festival report, something coming out of the festival of what is our collective opinions on what should happen and the directions we should move in and things like that. And so I don't know, I'm wondering whether something like this might be quite a nice thought. Sorry, David.
Yeah, I'll just try and be quick. Thinking back to the point that it seems that there's just a lack of knowledge and understanding about the sort of the democratic movement and how to draw attention to it. I went off on a bit of a flight of imagination. And I thought, what would happen if we kind of used some of their own tools against them? You know, we were talking about how league tables have really done a disservice to schools and education. Why don't we produce our own league table of freedom, kind of an index of freedom of different countries, and kind of really try and publicize it to effectively shame countries into trying to introduce more free principles into their education systems. I mean, I'm no politician or anything like this, so it'd be just, again, as I said, a flight of imagination there.
Marco? Oh, Gabriel, sorry. Gabriel goes first.
As IDEC council member, I would need to check it and get approval from the IDEC community, but that would take 8 days to have a voting on that. We already did it with the theory group, that we have the online platform, which is called Basecamp, and then we can create a project and use this online platform for communication. For example, in between, if you do this proposal of a monthly meeting, we can parallelly could use such a platform, which I'm quite sure that IDEC would be loving to wie sagt man, zur Verfügung stellen, to put on this posture. This would be a proposal to create maybe a platform of communication which is a little bit better to have an overview than email lists or other things. Therefore, I would propose to create maybe this kind of project inside of IDEC Basecamp. Thank you.
Marco.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could use something similar, like for this open space. We could have even more frequent meetings. Invite people to make talks every Saturday or something, and it would be same time. We could use the same thing that Cecilia's doing, like with our preparation meetings. That we have 2 meetings at the same time, same day, for the people in Eastern or like different sides of the world, so everyone can access them. And nothing's stopping us. It's very easy to organize and doesn't take much energy if we make it some like an open space idea.
It's a lovely idea, because also I think that what we'd all it's sometimes quite easy when we got so many different time zones and people around the world. It's quite easy for a little group to get together somewhere and have some things and bring some thoughts together, and then another little group. Then timing wise, it might be nice to have the option to do that. And also what you were saying, Gabriel, as well, having communication possibly through the IDEC Basecamp as well. So those 2 things could potentially be quite nice ways of getting things together and sort of leading up to the festival. Gabriel?
Yeah, I think the talks and the meetings are important, and it's very important, especially to get in touch and get a feeling and have this relationship establishing. But I think we need a platform to really work on parallelly, so both of it, to combine it. I think just me to talk is not going to be enough. I think we need a platform to really work on structures, work out papers, work out teacher trainings, work out workshops, whatever, but really have a working platform where we can work on together.
Jerry.
So I am going to follow up on the things that we talked about in the earlier meeting today, and create an organization that has subcommittees to talk about public schools, students, etc. But also I want to remind people that we do have our open Sunday chats. We've had them every day since the pandemic started. People here have been in them. But if you look at the newsletter, there's a way to get in every Sunday at noon Eastern time to discuss whatever you want to talk.
Okay, we're going to have to end this session. It's difficult because there's lots of lovely thoughts, and it's really nice that these sort of conversations are all coming up. And I think that whatever happens, we should definitely be moving forward to be creating some ideas like this. People can get in contact with the festival. There's, the festival will have lots of communication with people as well, so we can put some information out and see if there's any way we can sort of get some conversations going. But people can also, I think, emailing each other, let's sort of start to get some conversations and see over the next month or so we can get something set up and we can start to sort of moving forward with it, really. But I think leading up to the main festival, I think that there's so much we'll be able to do, and I think it'll be a really, really valuable thing. And how far we get, whether we just come up there with some ideas and then have more discussions there and launch it from there or whatever else. But I think the point is let's sort of start those conversations and let's see where we get with it.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah,
that was the reason why we came in with us with this idea to have this discussion, to just come into get into communication, to get into a talk with each other, and to introduce our movement as one that is very open to new ideas and to communication. So there we are.
Amazing. Okay, I can see there's hands coming up, and I'm just aware we're over time, and Michael is with us at the moment, and he's got a session now starting. So just loads of love to you all again. Really, really lovely to sort of have the conversations, and obviously we're in nearly the last day of the festival, but it's just so nice to sort of have. I know that there's been lots of lovely conversations going on, but thank you all so much for joining. And Michael, we'll just have a few minutes, shall we? And then we'll get you started.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for being there.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Amazing.
See you next year, Henry, and whoever.
Well, hopefully before. We'll see how that goes.